everyone. I'm Chris Douglas, the business program manager and program lead for Xbox Game Camp. I hope everyone's having a great time for Xbox Game Camp Ukraine. Here with me, I have a couple of wonderful folks that will introduce themselves, and we're going to get right into this moderated panel about UI, UX, and game design. So start with you, Art.
Hi, my name is Art Usher. I'm the Senior Manager of Content Review at Mojang.
Hi, I'm Sola Chang. I am a UI UX designer at Blizzard working for Hearthstone.
Hi, I'm Ken Lobb, Creative Director for Xbox Game Studios.
Awesome. So we're gonna jump right into this. I know all of you very well, but we want everyone else to get to know you a bit. You've all worked on some pretty amazing projects over the course of your time in the industry, whether it be shorter or longer. So just tell us a bit about your background in the industry and then how you got into games.
Sure. So I started in the game industry back in 2002. I was at Activision. I had a introductory role as a game tester, which was great because I was able to learn a lot about sort of just like how games are created and things like that. And from there, I was able to become a junior designer / production coordinator on a game early in my career, which was really great. I've worked at a number of different studios. I worked at Luxoflux, I worked at Neversoft, at THQ, Heavy Iron, and then now I've been at Microsoft for the last 12 years. And I've also worked in the production role for games and things like that. So I've had a plethora of a lot of different experiences throughout the industry over the last 20 plus years.
Awesome. Sola?
Yeah, I would love to say my background is as exhaustive, but my pathway is a little bit untraditional. I was first actually exposed to the game development space in college when a friend introduced me to game jams, and since then I kind of done that on the side with a group of friends. I actually ended up teaching in South Korea after I graduated with an English degree, but making games was still a passion of mine, so I still did that. And when my time with teaching was over, I kind of pivoted to making a bunch of small indie games with a group of friends for about half a year. And after that stint, I did a little bit of freelancing, and a recruiter from Blizzard actually reached out and invited me to go through their process, and I came to join Blizzard. So I've been there for about 3 years since last Friday. Yeah,
congrats on the anniversary.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. And then the legendary Ken.
So I've been doing it a while. So I started actually an engineer working at AMD in 1982. I got into the game industry in 1988 working for a small Japanese third party called Taxan USA Corporation. That's where I was able to design my first game. Second game I worked on, I was like, hey, we should have a license. And they're like, well, you should go. And I went off to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and licensed G.I. Joe, made an NES game. I was at that company for about 3 years. I moved to Namco. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Namco. I was able to work on a few Genesis games, a couple other things, got to meet the arcade team. During those two, I met a bunch of people around the industry going to shows, and a friend of mine from Nintendo convinced me to come up to work at Nintendo to work on the Nintendo 64 in 1993, where I worked on a bunch of stuff, Killer Instinct, GoldenEye, helped around buying really all the hardware and software that Rare used to do all their games, starting with Donkey Kong Country. I moved to Microsoft in 2002, just after the Xbox shipped, and in the Xbox org, I've done many roles from strategy work when I first came over. Then I ran one of the publishing studios, became a general manager. That's fun, but I prefer the creative side. So I moved to creative direction. First ran an incubation team, then became creative director for publishing all up. And then finally my role that I'm in now, which is creative director for first party at Xbox Game Studios.
That's awesome. So everyone here has a background in design. You're doing some level of design. So I want to start the question with you, Sola. How does UI UX design parallel and complement game design? And then how do you work to communicate cohesively between the two disciplines?
Oh yeah, I would say it's such an integrated process. When I work with game designers over on Hearthstone, we kind of start from the beginning. So after they start brainstorming their card ideas, they bring up those mechanics and cards with me, and we start talking about like what are some areas that could be problematic in conveying a certain mechanic, or maybe how it's going to be displayed with our current UI. So like we start talking about some areas of where we could address those issues. And then it depends on the designer and how they like to collaborate with UI UX design, but sometimes I have jam sessions with those designers. So we say, here's a problem, or here's an area we want to address, and then in the moment we just kind of brainstorm, start like throwing out ideas together and kind of riff raff off of each other's sort of ideas and kind of progress from there. So it's very collaborative, it's very teamwork oriented. So, and I love that process, and I feel like everyone has such a strong, valid opinion and perspective that it all adds together for such a good design.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then Ken and Art, you feel free to add into that. I know, Ken, we talked about like this, how cool it is for like the cards to slam up against each other, in there. So like, how do you, was that something that you just got into? It's like, this is a great moment in design. That's
so one of the things that I've always believed and has been reinforced with many of the teams I've worked with over the years is that the best games they spend enough time on the thing that you do the most. It's a quote that I actually got from Mr. Miyamoto, was make sure the thing that the player does most in a game is the most fun. It doesn't mean it has to be the thing that will keep you engaged for a long period of time, but when it comes to a game like Hearthstone, when I first played Hearthstone, like literally the first move of the way a card slammed, and then when they were fighting, the way the cards were interacting with each other, it hit me in seconds. It's like, hey, this is kind of fun when you actually make putting a card down feel good. Yeah. That idea, kind of flows through, I think, all great games, whether it's do you spend the time to make it more fun to walk across a field or ride a horse, can lead to things like, again, another simple quote from Legend of Zelda. When we were working on Ocarina of Time, you could roll, and it was faster than walking. And I just randomly asked Mr. Miyamoto, why is rolling like faster than walking? That seems, well, because rolling's more fun. That was the answer. Rolling is more fun. and I do think that part, is vital. To go touch on the other thing you said, I know we have some people on the call who are new to the industry, some people who have done work in the past. Design is collaborative. The days of, even when I was young and I designed, G.I. Joe, it was a bunch of people building a game. Mm-hmm. And the job of the designer or creative director, anybody on the team, is to help gather up the best ideas that are coming from a group of people, and then helping the rest of the team understand why the picked parts are the best. And in the best teams will do that organically. They'll start figuring out, hey, we got 20 ideas, we can do 2, and they'll wrap their head around the 2, and it becomes the lead designer, creative director's job to just make sure that stuff fits with the overall original idea for the game. Very often the game, in fact, I would argue, never has a game shipped that was exactly what started on day one. Yeah. And the best games are the ones where the team together sort of meanders towards the things that are the most fun. Anyway, that's enough on that subject.
I think, it's funny, you bring up a really good point of like the thing you do the most in the game feeling the most fun. I remember you and I had the opportunity to work on a game together with Recore, and just having Jewel moving around in the space, having her double jump, having her dash, that just in and of itself was fun, right? And so it's like, then when you start to build the other mechanics around it, you have this baseline of just an entertaining part of the game that just reinforces kind of this idea of what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as we're talking about the things that we love the most, or the features that are really pivotal to the game that we find the fun in, I want to come to you, Art. What is the most exciting but challenging project you've worked on, and what did you learn from that experience? But most importantly, how did you celebrate the things that didn't get finished in that game?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There have been a few. I think the one I would sort of speak to the most would be Tony. I was gonna say the internal code word. Tony Hawk's Proving Ground, which was it was the first game of its kind that I'd worked on. And I'd done level design before, but level design for me in other spaces was a lot more forgiving in terms of like what you wanted to do in order to make the game like work, right?
Right.
And so, but with this, we were recreating spaces like Love Park in Philly and Independence Hall and things like that. And so, finding the balance of like how do you make something skatable, but then also make it look like something real. That goes back to what Ken was talking about earlier about it being a collaborative process, where it's like working with your artist to say, look, I'm going to make some concessions. I'm going to do some things on the design side to make sure that your art can be what it needs to be, but then the soul of the design can also come through. And so I think the challenge was was like going there, getting a bunch of reference material, and then figuring out how do we convert that into something that's playable. I think that was one of the most challenging ones I've ever worked on.
Yeah. And then Sola and Ken, do you want to add to any part of that?
Yeah, I think that's, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I think one of the great things about games like Hearthstone that are a live service is that if you don't push anything out right away, you can always come back. It's like an iterative process as well. So you can definitely learn from things, and then if you have the additional time and resources to come back to it, that's always, a positive side. So it's not, it's not always like a negative thing if you can't push something out. It's just a learning opportunity and, opportunity to make it better when you do have the chance to do that. So.
Yeah. And Ken?
So to go sideways just a hair. When I was growing up, I was a pretty hardcore skateboarder. Like big half pipes. I built giant half pipes, skated in empty swimming pools, wandered all over the Midwest looking for skate parks. So Tony Hawk was pretty near and dear to my heart. When those games came out, I was, oh yes, because skateboarding hurts. I don't do that pretty much anymore. But one of the things that I found fascinating about the Tony Hawk franchise, and I still engage in skateboarding. I watch the competitions, etc. The video game Tony Hawk influenced the skate community all up. And so how did they do it? What Art is describing here was the mastery of not just a move on an obstacle, which is what skateboarding was when I was growing up. It was lines through levels. And really, it was taking the idea of skateboarding and turning it into a platform game. And the ability to, some of this was gap jumps, but a lot of it was rails to connect, this wall to that rail to this gap. And it's come full circle. If you watch the last Olympics, for example, what street skating has become is, of course, linking between all these obstacles. But it's bowl skating, the thing I used to do kind of on vert, where it's been the most impacted. Bowls, when I was young, again, it would be a pool, a kidney-shaped pool. Sometimes you'd have crazy stuff where it was like 2 or 3 parts to the pool. At the Olympics, it was this crazy obstacle course pool with like big pyramids in the middle, and the winners aren't just the ones that are doing the best moves. It's the one that managed a line that goes all the way through the entire skate park, which is exactly what Tony Hawk did like 20 years ago. I find that, kind of cool. Where in a way where, for me personally, sport, video game, and now I see it again in the sport. It's cool. And all driven by, excellent level design, really.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, so talking about level design, and the next question I'll start with you for Ken. We talk about like the design gymnasium, like a gray box area where you can go into it and you build all your gameplay mechanics and make sure that those mechanics work great and you're on the golden path to find the fun. Like that's exactly what you're trying to do there before you start spending a lot of time and resources on building out an elaborate environment. In particular, like if in Recore, if the dash jump was 8 feet and then you built a gap that was 9 feet, then that's not fun, and then you got to go back and rescript and rebuild things. So that's amazing advice that you always kind of give, thinking about those things. So what are some valuable things that you've learned along the way that you want to share with campers? And like, feel free to deep dive and go in on this one.
Cool. Whenever you're starting a game, and again, I love the fact that you've riffed on stuff, and you've also done indie game stuff on the side. It's often hard to think small enough, right? It's easy to go, I'm going to make a next GTA. I'm going to go build a better Elden Ring. I'm going to go build some big giant thing. And that's fine. But at its core, you need to rip it down to, no, what are you really trying to build? Are you trying to build a combat game? Are you trying to build a shooter? Are you trying to extract from that the one mechanic that you're going to build first.
Yeah.
And it's worth the time, as much as you feel you want to spend, on building that singular mechanic and perfecting it to the point where, again, it's fun to do the one thing. But then you got to figure out how to test it. And what I'd seen, especially in the early days of the video game industry, teams would do some of that. Meanwhile, even though a team is only 5 or 6 or 7 at the time, people would be off building levels. And then they'd put these two things together, character motion and level design, and like, oh, wow, this doesn't work. I need to go rework either the character or the environment. So the idea came up of, hey, maybe we should build test levels. And, we'd call them a gem. This goes back decades. Let's just build a small area that if it's a platform game, I need to know how far the character can jump. Even way back then, a lot of games were doing level up. So what's a level 1 character do? What's a max level character do? What's the spectrum in between? As games got more complicated, Recore is a nice example. Their gym was incredible because they knew they were going to have a character that could single jump, double jump, air dash, and I like breaking prototypes. So early on, I figured out that if you were on the ground and you dashed off a ledge, that didn't count as a dash because the game was going to let you do 2 jumps and a dash. Well, I could do a dash and then 2 jumps and a dash. And again, it's a very small industry. You'd be surprised. The lead designer on the original Recore was a friend of mine that I worked on around Metroid Prime 1. So we were pretty good friends. And, he kind of knew right off the bat, they send the build to the gymnasium. And I'm like, look what I did. And he's like, I knew Ken was going to break this build somehow. And just to give the description of that scenario, because it's pretty easy, one of the good things to build, it looks like a staircase laid down flat with basically different gaps, of course, measured in meters in most games cases. Right. So a 1 meter gap, a 2 meter gap, 3 meter gap. So they'd set all these up as a way to test single jump, double jump, dash. And they'd laid them out in such a way that it was, again, a big piece of stairs. And like right off the bat, I played like 10 minutes and I call him up. He's like, I can jump lengthwise over that space. And they're just like, you can what? Because again, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm jumping like 11. And you're not supposed to be able to jump 11. And I send them a little video. And they're like, oh, that's not supposed to count. That leads to the other lesson that's important, I think, as you're building games. That wasn't a bug. That was a feature. And again, in the perfect world we were in, we hadn't built any levels yet. And they had this interesting observation, though, of, well, we don't really want to teach people that. And that's actually a good thing sometimes. So you do the tutorial around, hey, you can now double jump, hey, now you can dash. And you do simple little setups where people understand, I probably have to jump and then dash. And then of course, you unlock the second jump. So then you start seeing things like, I didn't think I could get there before. Now, I can jump and then dash and jump. Or you could jump twice and then dash. But hidden were these places that you didn't have to go there, but they were goodies, where if you had figured out dash off the ledge and then jump, dash, jump, that you could get to those locations. And again, all that came from the first prototype. Like within minutes, figuring out that there was a mechanic that they didn't expect. And, again, it's not like I do all this stuff. Teams find these type things all the time. Right. This unexpected behavior that often breaks the stuff that you've already built. A good trick in video games is, can you front load that? Can you figure out as much as possible? And the way to do that, as Chris was alluding to, is build this space that includes jump gaps, jump heights. We like angles now because IK, inverse kinematics is a good way to animate characters now. So you need to make sure that, how does friction play with this? How does angle on the ground play with this? How does that impact my jump? If you're using more realistic physics, which, in most cases still isn't real. Right. If you're jumping off an angle, you might not go as far as if you're jumping off straight. If you're sliding down an angle and jump, maybe you go a little bit farther. Figure that all out before you actually unleash the level designers, and then a designer can set up a set of rules that the level designers should be following. Okay, this level is supposed to be easy. We're going to use this many meters, this many meters. To touch on the last piece, hidden in that is what causes frustration versus fun. And the trick is, be careful with things that you can't just make. Because humans are visual. And 3D games, it's often hard to exactly measure distance, right? So I might look from this table to the one over there that might be off camera and think, oh, I can double jump that. And if it's literally half a foot further than the possible double jump, I'm going to die and get angry, and this game sucks, and I'm out. So you don't put things at just unmakeable. Right. You make sure it's either makeable or there's a big gap so that you can visually look and go, yeah, I can't make that jump. That jump, I can jump from here to the camera. Yeah, off the edge, double jump, grab the ledge perfectly and climb up. That was long, but I do think where you start in a game and landing a fun mechanic that you're then able to test without spending a lot of time on art will end up with, I like spending a lot of time with art, I mean visuals, is a good way to get the most out of the early prototyping work you do on a game.
Yeah, awesome. And then Sola and Art, we'll leave that open for y'all as well. As anything that you learned so far that you would want to.
Yeah, I did want to just talk briefly about what you mentioned there with Recore in particular, because it's an interesting. So I'll just back up really quick. One of my early mentors in the industry told me something I never forgot, which is if it's not fun in gray box, it's not going to be fun fully arted, right? And so this idea of sort of like finding out like where all this stuff works and how it works is part of that creative process. One of the things I think I just want to add to what you said, Ken, is that that informed on our challenges later in the game. Because remember when we had those challenges, we actually thought about it from the standpoint of we know the player is going to have all of these abilities at this point, so now they're going to have an opportunity to really test their reflexes and how they do it. And so the main game had sort of a linear layout, but we were able to go a lot more free-flowing in terms of how we laid things out for these supplementary challenges that weren't critical to the game, but really would sort of push people in terms of like how they wanted to use these mechanics.
Those levels were so fun.
Yeah.
Again, for those that haven't played Recore, it's worth digging into the end game because it's some of the best platforming I've ever played.
Yeah, it's
great,
pretty awesome.
Great work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Sola? Yeah.
And I wanted to add on to kind of that thought as well. I think it kind of leads into like the idea of playtesting early and often, so you can, have that exposure, know how players will play the game, if they will, find interesting ways to combine mechanics like that. And when you do kind of, extend off of those new discoveries, and it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? So I recently watched a game design talk by the designers of Celeste, and they did something similar where they had all these levels made. They had all these levels made, and then they had like players who would like kind of break it, right? And they're like, oh, I didn't even think you could do that, and then kind of take that and iterate over. And like, okay, we designed for the masses, but now we have these core, hardcore players who want to speed run and like find all these like little loops and stuff, so they start designing for that as well. So it's I think goes into get your game in front of as many people as you can early and often, so that you can identify those areas.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could add one more thing to what Art
sure.
said, that's like I'll flip it. The idea of if your game isn't fun in gray box, it will never be fun, is also a warning to teams that spend time to make a prototype very beautiful, because that often masks that the game is no fun. Right? So you'll put the game in playtest, and everyone's like, oh my, it's so beautiful, it's the best thing I've ever seen. And if they were actually to play the game for an hour, they'd go, this game is boring and terrible. And yet, if you're playing it, in its ugly state, and they're finding fun, once you make it beautiful, now you have this lure to keep the player in.
Exactly.
And it's vital, right? And we've taken it to the point where sometimes when a team is big enough and we know what we're building and we can start making something pretty, we'll even try and keep the build separate for a while to make sure that we have the sort of ugly build to run sort of the real truth around playtests. And then over time, we can then start showing people the integrated build that's beautiful and fun, and then trusting that a little more because we've got the information earlier around what it was like to play a gray box. The other, just to reinforce what you were saying about the vital importance of testing, right? If there's a flaw that small teams make, it's if they fall in love with their game, which is what you really want, they will always make the game too hard. Always. That's okay. Make that hard mode. But just be aware that you let people that have never touched your game play and watch carefully, because you can turn off a lot of players with a game that you balanced perfectly. I've made this mistake many times in my NES days. I didn't have big test teams. One of the things I did was before I shipped a game on hard, I wanted to be able to beat the game without ever dying. And what I would do as my last tweaks was if I died, I knew I was good at the game. That character gone, or I'm going to put an easier one there. I was making changes based on if just one playthrough did I die or not. Yeah. I go back and play those games now, and on easy, I die 20 times in level 1. Those games were too hard. Sorry. And I could have learned that if I'd had a bunch of people playing and I was able to watch them play. Maybe I would have kept the hard level hard, but made the easy level easier.
Yeah. I mean, that's just part of, like, so many people experience games in different ways. And even earlier today, throughout the entirety of the content that we had, so many people have talked about, like, I only like the narrative, story-driven experiences. I like fast-paced action. I like to play stealth. We talked about Indiana Jones and stuff. So, like, there's so many different ways that players play. You do want to get as many diverse perspectives on that game and how they play to try and make, as many changes to it as possible. Positively for your player base. Especially, like I said, we have so many people from varying backgrounds and experience. So as everyone is kind of starting off, this is pretty amazing advice to have for us. So we have one question left, and we do want to get at least maybe 1 or 2 questions from the chat as well. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat now, and then we'll get through this question and then see if you have any for us. So this is for the entire group. If you were starting all over again right now, but you had all of your game development knowledge, what would you give? What is some advice you would give to your past self? And we'll start with you, Art.
Start with me?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Be patient with yourself. Yeah. Understand that you're not going to be perfect. Everything is not going to coalesce perfectly. But, stay vigilant and stick with what you're doing. I think one of the things that, I personally call it sort of it's like the Dak from the Empire Strikes Back complex, right? Like Dak was this co-pilot of Luke Skywalker's who was just like, I think I can take on the entire Empire today, and then he was unceremoniously killed, right? And so you certainly don't want to.
Flat.
one of the things that we all have, I think I can say, all designers have in common is that we all want to hit a grand slam the first time. We're so passionate about it. That's all we want to do. But understanding that, like, going through the repetitions, being able to understand first, how do I even get into a batting stance before even swinging the bat, before even imagining that you're going to have an ability to even get a hit, right? Like, getting through those phases, I think those are the things that I'd want to impart onto myself if I had the ability to speak to a younger version of myself.
That's awesome advice. Sola?
Yeah, and this kind of comes from the lens of a UI UX designer, and I think one core skill that I think is very underrated when you're first starting out is communication. So when you're designing a game, you can, like, especially as a UI UX designer, you can design the most beautiful flows, mock up the beautiful screens, but if you can't convey and iterate on what you're trying to showcase, your team can't build it out, right? So being able to elegantly describe what you're trying to achieve, whether it's through written words or speaking or presenting or storytelling, like kind of learning and honing that craft of communication, I think is super key to building successful product and game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, Ken?
So there's a couple things I'd advise. The first one is making games is ridiculously hard, but you want to make sure you're having fun. If you're not having fun, your game's not going to be fun. That doesn't mean it's going to be fun every day. Making games is really hard. The second piece is design for the people that you have. What I mean by that is, I see teams, it's okay to go, we don't have this skill set, who wants to go learn it? That's okay. What's better is, I call it what's on the table. So here's a table, and there are 4 of us, and we want to go build a game. It's best to start with, so what are you an expert at? What are you an expert at? Even if that's one thing. Oh, I'm really good at this. I can do UI. I can mess around with core mechanics. We were talking earlier about scripting. We've got someone who's pretty good at scripting. I've seen him do it. And so being able to start with an asset that you have, rather than realizing too early, well, we can't do that. Nobody knows this. And then, again, you're starting with sadness. Start out with what you can do, what's on the table. Yeah. The second piece is, no, you're never going to ship the thing, like I said earlier, that you started. And as fast as you can, get to the point where you have something fun and immediately switch to ship mode. What I mean by that is, hey, we've got this little white box thing and it's kind of fun. What if we had to ship it in a week? Again, this is why Game Jam is so important.
Yeah.
Being able to learn, rapidly get to something that's okay. Can we make something out of just that? Yeah. What if it's one of the reasons I love rogues, right? One of the things that kind of hit me, like, I'm learning all the time. And, so how do I learn? I play way too many video games. It's great. Life is great. Sorry. And I'll sometimes learn from a completely unexpected. And one of those was Dead Cells.
Yeah.
And another one was Hearthstone for a different reason. But Dead Cells was like, played it like 5 minutes and I went, I could have made this on the NES. And it was the idea that a very small number of assets in 5 levels, and dying you start again, but you keep a couple of the things that you got, and then you just keep going and playing and going and playing. We could have made that on the NES, and nobody did. I mean, that taught me a couple things. One, there are still mechanics. There are still game design things that no one has figured out. Yeah. They're out there ready for someone to make. But more importantly, it's like, as the whole game industry continues to go after, we need literally 10,000 animations, we need hundreds of thousands of textures, we need 1,000 people on a team. I'm thrilled that we're making games like that. Yeah. But it's I think the best learning sometimes come from little game jams. Even in big teams, we'll often allow a team to break out and do, I've seen different teams do it different ways. One of the teams I worked with, one of my favorite things they did, because game development is very rigid. It's like, here's your job. This week you must do this. And here's the schedule. And you've got an army of people telling everybody what they have to do and when they have to do it. I tend to push them to keep 10% on the side so that when good ideas come up, you can still do them. But what smart teams will do is, hey, we're going to have a game jam once a quarter because it's a way to let off steam.
Yeah, sure.
The one thing I saw that I thought was the most smart was, we're going to have a game jam every other week. And what you get to do is fix the thing in the game you don't like. And it generated hundreds of prototypes for little things that could then be adopted, by the team in a way that was easier than just, hey, I got an idea, maybe we could do something. It's like, no, I built this little thing. It fixes this one problem I didn't like. Wow, some people were literally going after probably 3 bugs that they knew that were going to get cut. Surprise, surprise, not every game is bug-free. In fact, no games are bug-free. You basically make the right choices of what bugs to ship and what bugs to fix.
That's correct.
And so that unleashing of a team to go after and fix the things they hate, was great. While what they were getting out of it was this passionate ability to riff on something. I've seen that generate new games. Like, hey, that idea didn't work in this game, but in this other game, we could, that idea was brilliant. So getting that muscle of fast to fun and then thinking about, if I had to ship this, what's the minimal number of things I could add? That actually works on a 2-year game. It's Scrum. It's basically, when I first started, people would try and do waterfalls. Here's the spec. We're going to lay out exactly how many person weeks it's going to take. And then it would just be thrown away over and over and over and over. And I think smart teams have figured out, you make a high-level schedule, and then you Scrum. You basically do little milestones, and then you allow adaptive change to happen on the fly as you're building from one milestone to the next. And then I think the best design ideas, to close on this, are the ones, and I've been lucky enough to have a few of these ideas over the years, and I've seen other teams do the same thing. Hey, I got an idea. We could add this thing. And by adding that thing, we can cut this feature that's full of bugs, or we could not start this other thing that was still on the backlog and people have been stressing about, or we could simplify the UI by making this change. So again, save time. To sum that one up, the best idea is, everybody I've worked with has great ideas. This industry is filled with people who have wonderful ideas. Okay. The magic is when you realize sometimes the best idea, if it's something that's going to take person years, it's almost a hit to the morale for a team. Because they're like, that's the best idea. Oh, we don't have time. We should have known that 2 years ago. I'm sad. I'm bummed. a great designer will like, that's a good idea. I can't talk about that one. But back to the on the table idea, it's another phrase I use. Well, I know the code, I know the design aspiration of a team, I know what's going on in the build, I know what the current milestone is. If I've got an idea that simplifies all that, then suddenly you've made the team happy. They're like, that's a great idea. And we could, you just saved us like months.
Yeah.
Because, yes, please. And again, that's not just me. I've seen that type of thing happen over and over and over again, where you boost the morale of a team and yet you save time. And again, saved time doesn't always mean the game ships earlier. It means the game ships cleaner, better, more fun, more polished.
Yeah, that's all.
Anyway,
Yeah,
long answer, but
no, it's always good stuff from you. And just thinking about like Vampire Survivors and Balatro, like
Yep,
those smaller games.
that's another one.
You have more fun with those games than other things. So yeah, all
I,
of the
I love you brought that up because that was literally the third game I was going to say was Vamp Survivors. I love Robotron.
Yeah.
And so when I played Vamp Survivors, and I know it came from Survivors, I owe my granddaughter, who I love research from friends and family. Granddaughter's like, Grandpa, I told you about Survivor, like 2 years ago. I was like, oh, crap. Sorry,
yeah,
Mila.
that's how it happens. That's how it happens. But we're gonna finish out with this last question and close out. This is from Maxim. Is what game did you want to make as a child? And some context is this was our special guest that we had. He's 11 years old. He's in Ukraine right now. He wants to be a developer. So he was pretty excited to ask this question to all of you. So what game as a kid was the game that you wanted to make?
So I can answer for myself wholeheartedly. I know exactly what game it was and exactly what level it was. So in the Wayback Machine, there was a game that was released by Konami called Contra 3: The Alien Wars.
Yes.
And the level in particular is you start out on cyber motorcycles and you're shooting enemies. And then halfway through that level, a helicopter comes down and you hop onto the helicopter. Then the helicopter takes you into the sky. And you're fighting a boss that has like a grappling hook.
Yeah.
And then from there, after you defeat that boss, you're rocketed. They fire the rocket that you're hanging onto towards this alien cruiser. And you are jumping from rocket to rocket to as the rockets are hitting, and you're trying to take this shield down so that they can destroy the thing. And then a massive explosion happens. And then you have survived. You're hanging on to the helicopter that you jumped off of. And it is one of the most incredible levels. And when I was a kid, when I started to sort of think about whether or not I would even want to be, like whether or not I could even be a part of the game industry, that was like not even a thought at that time. I was just like, if I ever get to do that, that's the kind of game I want to make. So for me, it's very easy.
Yeah, that was Contra 3 Alien Wars, that level in particular, I spent probably played 100 hours of just Contra 3 for that reason, because that level was so dope. Sola.
Yeah, gosh. I would say I loved playing games growing up, classic like Pokemon and such, but I think my appreciation for games grew when I was exposed to visual novel games actually in middle school, because I was a huge like daydreamer. I loved stories. I loved immersing myself in those kind of stories. So I think my aspiration was to build out a visual novel game, which I ended up doing in university when I was first introduced to game jams, and I was exposed to this world of like building a game in a short amount of time. And so I just took the world of a game I played a lot at the time. I don't know if you all know League of Legends. But they had such a beautiful, backstory. They had this world. So we kind of like took a part of that and built out a team of like 30 enthusiasts who also were fans of that game. We all came together to build out a visual novel game, and it's probably out there somewhere on itch, but yeah, it was great.
So check it out. All right, and Ken, 60 seconds. You got this.
So when I was young, there were no video games. Yes, there was Space War when I was a kid, baby, but you had to have a supercomputer to play it on. So I'll tell a story of when I was about 12. Started about 10. I got heavily into reading. And when I was about 12, I read John Carter of Mars. And I actually think that game influenced my life. It made me feel like, I like heroic stories. I like being good in video games. But what I liked about John Carter was a character that could jump. The first video game I worked on was based on, as I was playing arcade games in the late 70s, early 80s, I was looking for, why can't anybody be like John Carter? Why can't you jump really high? First game I designed, Logi Man. I actually tried to get the John Carter license. They were weird. So ended up making a game where on the NES, using the MMC3 chip, which allows you to scroll horizontal and vertical, you could level up to the point where you would jump 3 screens high. So I actually was able to fulfill the dream of making the game that I had thought about for years before that.
Awesome. So that's all the time that we have today. I would like to thank Ken from Xbox Game Studios, Sola from Blizzard, and then Art from Mojang. So to close us out, we're going to throw it back to Esteban and Peter at 11-Bit Studios. Thank you, everyone, for coming to Xbox Game Camp Ukraine. Have a great day. Bouvet.